Me Guyana, land of many waters with 6 races living together.
Globespan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion, with the pros, the cons, the ones that is taken aside, and the ones that stand in the middle. Globespan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation's building. Globespan believes that every Guyanese voice is part of the nation's building. As we span the globe, that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana.
Coffee and Dr. Jagan, Bobby, she gave us our great sons. Rohan Kanhai, Coffee and Dr. Jagan.
As the world turns on its axis bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adopt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. Globespan stands on its axis, with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
Me Guyana, land of many waters with 6 races living together.
So, viewers, listeners, welcome to another edition of Globespan24x7, owned and operated by Mr. Nohar Singh, and with Mr. Devin Bissoon as our technical operator tonight. We are discussing, or rather, we are doing an assessment of the teacher strike, which ended, quote unquote, ended a few days ago, Monday gone. Joining us for discussion tonight are 3 very, very eminent personalities, 2 are professors, and 1 a senior counsel in Guyana. With us is Professor Terrence Blackman of McGivers College, Professor Paul Tennassee of Washington, and we have Mr. Timothy Jonas, General Secretary of the ANUG, a new United Guyana. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for us to discuss this very, very important topic. First, we will begin with this whole concept of collective bargaining and a strike. And we have with us Mr. Paul Tennassee, who himself at one time was a leader of a labor union in Guyana, and if I'm not mistaken, with international linkage as well. Mr. Tennassee, Professor Tennassee, would you mind telling us this whole, or define for us this entire concept of collective bargaining?
Well, I really thought that we had senior counsel on the ground, but anyhow, I will. It is true that I've been in labor since 21 years old, and I served as the Secretary of International Relations for the National Workers Union in Guyana, General Secretary of the Caribbean Workers Council, which is 25 unions in the Caribbean, the executive of the Confederation. So, man, I did work on labor for the Ontario, Canada. I wrote 2 books on labor, one on Venezuela, one on the US, and I represented at the UN, the World Confederation of Labor. So I'm very au fait with the international labor standards. Quite frankly, I'm very disappointed that we have failed to maintain a tradition and a culture of labor management, labor relations based on a kind of tripartite agreement, private sector, government, and the labor unions. Now, unfortunately, the Ministry of Education and the Guyana Teachers Union were not able to reach an agreement, and I have observed an aberration in labor management relations. It had to go to a judge, and a judge had to issue an order, and then the chief education officer contravened the judge's order. So this is a new development in Guyana, where we have to go to the courts. Usually in industrial relations, we have procedures within the system. Now we have a history of trade unionism in Guyana. Hubert Nathaniel Critchlow, Ayub Eden, Chedi Jagan, Forbes Burnham. I don't want to go over the list. And all these people have always been identified with the labor unions. Some have abused it. I recall during the Burnham period, when he transformed the Constitution in a fraudulent election to make himself executive president, he went a step further and they had a labor amendment bill in 1984, which virtually gave the president the powers over the wages of workers. It was like slavery. You can't own the wages of workers. So the president of a country or the prime minister of a country cannot intervene and set wages. It has to be negotiated. Now, labor unions are not dedicated to oppose, expose, and depose a government. The culture of the labor union is to negotiate. It's a culture of I give and you give. But you negotiate hard. If there's a total breakdown, then you resort to strike. So I'm very disappointed that the actors involved in this teacher strike have fallen down. And it's not good for liberal democracy, which I thought that we were going to develop beyond free and fair elections. That was a basis for us to have. Unless we have a strong labor union, a strong private sector, and a strong government, but balancing. The Germans have a model called co-determination. And in it, you find that they try to reach consensus. So I'm very disappointed about what has happened, but they are now back. The strike has been called off. But as we go into the program, I want to talk about the working poor and the powerless and why teachers, I think, have to go and take the strike action.
Let's turn to the professor. You did mention, I'm sorry, the senior counsel. And let's ask the senior counsel if you could give a little more clarity on this whole concept of labor collective bargaining, industrial action, a strike. Senior counsel.
Okay.
Timothy Jonas.
Thanks for that, sir. I think we got to start at the beginning because you got viewers here who may need a crash course just to remind us all what a union is about. A lot of people don't know that trade unions are actually illegal, they're unlawful. Because if you think about what a union is an institution that is designed to break a contract. Your employer employs you for $1 a day, and the union comes to say to you, break your contract, $1 a day is not enough. So it wasn't until 1903 that trade unions actually became lawful by virtue of legislation. But I'll tell you why a trade union, theoretically, conceptually, is important. If you have an employer who needs 10 guards, I promise you, in any society, you got 100 people who want those 10 jobs. So it's easy for the employer to pick and choose, and if he don't like you, he fire you and he hire somebody else. But there's only one of him, and those 100 people are all desperate to get a job from that one man. So it is unequal in terms of the negotiating power to negotiate what your salary is going to be. The employer can dictate, if you don't like it, they got 99 more people just like you he can go to. And all of them got to feed their families. And there's only one of him. And if he treats you badly, you can leave the job. They got 99 more just like you. So it became important, and it was logical back in the 1800s for employees to join together into a single unit, so that if an employer got 20 staff, 20 employees, all 20 of them come in at the same time to say you got to fix this thing. Because it might be easier for him to fire one and replace one. But if all 20 walk off, well, business done. And more than that, if all 20 walk off and then form a line across his gate so that nobody else can come in and nobody else can go out, it's harder for the employer to manage the mess that he has created. So the union and this concept of collective bargaining, all 20 employees collectively having this talk with the employer, was intended to equalize the negotiating power, the bargaining power. Now, it's a nice idea, isn't it? But it often doesn't work. Because as we will see, and Paul talked about it when we get into this program, we will see that even though conceptually, this thing sounds nice. The reality is there are lots of ways to get behind the union, to undermine the employee, to intimidate, to put fear. And it has to be carefully managed. And if a union is not properly run, they are susceptible to all kinds of mechanisms to undermine them.
Anything to add, Professor Blackman, Medgaver's professor?
No, I think I broadly agree with the structural sort of assessment of what unions do, what they're for, etc. And I think perhaps from my perspective, I would rather see us kind of jump into the discussion and really begin to talk about, this specific issue that goes to the teacher strike at this moment. But
no, please go ahead.
Yeah.
No, please go ahead. Tell us what led to the strike. I mean, could it have been avoided?
Well, I mean, I think that's the issue, and that's where I think I wanted to offer something. I mean, governments, as Senior Counsel Jonas just enumerated, employers have some responsibility to think about how they judiciously allocate, financial resources across the space in which they have some control. In a similar manner, the government has some responsibility to judiciously allocate financial support across various sectors. But the point I think I want to hammer home today is that, prioritizing education and teacher compensation is not mutually exclusive from investing in other areas. I want to say that. I mean, I think this is one, as I've listened to the debate, there is a sense in which the prioritization of education broadly as a sector and teacher compensation is being kind of juxtaposed with the government's investment in other areas. And I think that I wanted to kind of emphasize that in a real way, these things are not mutually exclusive. And I think the large point that I want to kind of start a discussion with is that, look, a well-educated population is foundational to addressing national security challenges, climate adaptation, the economic development challenges that we face. And so in a real sense, the sort of investment in education really catalyzes the improvement across all sectors, fosters innovation, it enhances the upskilling the workforce, and then more broadly sort of promoting some sort of social equity. And so while fiscal prudence, as the government has raised, and we can talk more about, the particular positions that they've taken, and perhaps this is good because, as have been noted, the fact is that we're now at the table, and so perhaps we can offer some broad thoughts around what's important to be considered at the table. So my opening remarks say, look, fiscal prudence is important, but there's an argument here for significantly improving the teachers' salaries in Guyana. And really, it centers on a kind of broader perspective of education as indispensable investment in Guyana's future. And, the thing is, as a professor, as a member of a union, we have something here called the PSC CUNY, which is the Professional Services Union. I know that, adequately compensated, motivated, high quality teaching force is crucial for realizing the job here in the City University of New York. And I think it will be similarly crucial for realizing Guyana's development goals. And so, I think we really ought to be seriously exploring how we can effectively increase the teacher's salary while maintaining this broad sort of thing of fiscal prudence. So that's what I would like to start with. Yeah.
Bisram, can I
comment? Yeah, please, Paul, go ahead.
I want to piggyback Dr. Blackman. Both him and I are teachers. That's how we earn a living. So we understand teachers, we emphasize. And in Guyana, I was a primary school teacher, a secondary school teacher, and a university in Venezuela and all about the place. But the point I want to make is this, to piggyback what Dr. Blackman just said. The choice between investing in infrastructure with the oil money and in human resource development, particularly teachers, is not a Sophie's choice. The president of Brazil, Lula, was in Guyana, and he said it. He was a labor leader. I have been to Sao Paulo to the big conventions of labor unions. I've been to Brasilia. I know the labor movement in Brazil, and he's right. 80% of the salary increases and the standard of living has been due to the fact that they have collective agreement in Brazil. They have a strong trade union movement. They have a strong private sector. And Lula is a very strong president. Even though he's a labor leader, he has had the statesmanship quality to see all the actors have to play together. But the other point, which is very, very important, it's the condition of the teachers. Now, I did for over a year online a citizen diplomacy program with 20 school teachers in Guyana. And they were graduated at Cara Lodge in June last year, I think it was. And let me just give you an idea of the situation of teachers in Guyana. The teacher with the status of TQM 111, that is before being trained. After deductions are being made of the net income, he or she takes home a salary of 487 Guyana dollars with 80 cents. Now, with this amount, they have to pay bills, buy groceries, take care of needs, transportation for the month, to go back and forth from work, things for the home, rent. And so all these expenses leave that particular teacher I'm talking about, and I interviewed them online recently to find out what they were thinking. She's left with $2.35. Now, if you save this amount, she says, you're left in the case of illness with nothing. After graduating from Teachers College and given an AM status, teachers receive a gross salary of about $694. However, after deductions and all, they were left at about $562. Now, if that teacher training college is free, the president has promised that UG would be free, but it's not yet implemented. So if the teacher goes on to UG in September, then she has to pay fees. And if this teacher is in the quarantine or the Essequibo, and they have to come to Georgetown, to Terrence. So you see, this is not, the president of Brazil said that. Recently he was in Guyana. You cannot just think about infrastructure. You have to think of human resource development. Now, our teachers, in the hard days of the Guyana dictatorship, migrated to New York, to all the islands of the Caribbean. They benefited. What do you think will happen now if teachers migrate again? Now, you invest in them, send them to Teachers Training College, some of them even go on to UG, and then you export them. And you have to start from scratch again. And then you're talking about bringing migrants. Take care of your people who are there. Give them incentives to stay. And that is very, very important. Now, if we were to do, and you know, the inflation and cost of living index is very important. Now, these teachers have told me that they are struggling to go and make purchases with the money that they have. The cost of living has risen. Now, we have a central bank. They have the statistics. It's not secret. You know what the index for inflation is, what the cost of living is. And you have to see, you know, and the government cannot say that they have to invest in infrastructure. People have to eat, they have to live. And teachers, and I always say, are the organic intellectuals of a society. Look, a teacher knows everything. When a child comes into the class, they know if they get abuse going on in their house, if the parents are unemployed, if the child is hungry, and etc. etc. They know everything. These people are absolutely key for the society. And there are many countries where people invest deliberately into teachers and give them incentive. So I just like to share that perspective on the perspective of the teachers. I consider the teachers of Guyana as working poor, And without the collective agreement, they'd be powerless.
Okay, Senior Counsel Timothy Jonas, there was a strike and then there was bargaining, collective bargaining and negotiation. Did we have it? Did we have the reverse here or what?
Well, I'm not sure that there was collective bargaining and negotiations. Certainly there wasn't the reverse. I believe that demands were made and were ignored or refused. And then the teachers went on strike. So that's the usual process. That's how it happens. There's something I want to say first and foremost. My experience of unions in Guyana and of unionism leads me to the conclusion that the unions are often too political and often too bureaucratic and self-serving rather than looking after the interests of the people, the professionals, the workers that they should be representing. What I also have found that often employees are too timid in terms of the demands they make of the union and the representation that they get. I was really taken aback and pleasantly surprised at the steel that our teachers showed, not just in coming out in their numbers and in taking a stand, but in maintaining it for those 4 weeks. That was impressive because these are people who are a paycheck away from destitution. And they showed serious courage, remarkable courage. Now, don't let us take that away and don't let us diminish it, because I'm hoping that it is a sign of things to come, that it is a sign that Guyanese are showing greater autonomy, greater independence, greater determination to stand up for what is theirs and to fight for it, rather than what we've done historically, which is ducking, hiding underneath a rock and hoping for better, but grumbling quietly. So I want to take my hat off to the teachers and say congratulations, well done. I admire your courage and your persistence. I am not certain that I'm satisfied with the conditions that were agreed on their behalf for them to go back to work. But I think that more needs to be discussed on that subject, because I really haven't seen any concession given by the government, and I'm waiting to see how the litigation continues, because I also don't see that this is intended to be an end to the litigation, at least from the settlement agreement that I saw published in the on social media.
Okay.
Can I make a comment on that?
Okay, Paul. Yeah, go ahead.
There are a number of things about labor unions and NGOs, and I agree that in the Caribbean, when we emerge in the 20s and 30s and 40s, and even I myself had that model. We got that model from the British Labour Party. There was a time when the Labour Party and the TUC were like two sides of the same coin. Dr. Jagan led a union and led a political party. Basdev Pandey led a union and a political party. Bustamante led a union and a political party. Manley did the same thing. VC Bird did the same thing. And I could go on and go on. And I also was co-founded the National Workers Union and was head of the Democratic Labor Movement. It's called political unionism. It's a model that I think should be discarded. I think from my own experience and my knowledge of the labor movement and unions, that labor unions should be totally independent of political parties. And I think non-governmental organizations, and I have worked and served on the boards of non-governmental organizations in America and other places, and they also have to be independent of political parties. They have to, and the only way they'll be able to grow in strength is that they have to unite. And right now in Guyana, and historically, we have had a divided labor movement, and it continues between FITUG and the TUC. So the concept of political unionism is, because the government is accusing, rightly or wrongly, the GTUC, its leadership, that it's political. But by that implicitly, they are saying they're linked to a political party. I don't know if that is true, but the point is, what I'm saying is that somehow, and I consider myself a labor person, that labor has to put its house in order and become independent of political parties and the government. For many years, TUC was a toothless tiger. For many years, I did not support what GAU was doing because PPP was giving critical support to the dictatorship. I used to organize independent May Day marches, independent May Day marches of the TUC and GAU. So what I'm saying is that this issue of the teacher strike have brought to the fore, it's an opportunity for us to re-examine totally the role of labor unions, the role of NGOs, the role of government, and the role of private sector in the context of the Guyana, where we now have a significant amount of resources that could give Guyana a push forward towards integral development of some.
So, Professor Blackman, the point was made that the teachers walked off the job and it was illegal. There was no bargaining taking place. So was a strike warranted? Could it have been avoided? Should there have first been some kind of negotiation? And if there was a breakdown, then perhaps industrial action, which is normally what happens in America and other democratic countries.
So let me start with the American and the question of unions and political. Look, I think my colleagues here are being a bit are trying to make this too fine. I mean, unions and political parties have always had relationships historically.
Including in America.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I mean, I'm a part of a union, and that teachers union tends to skew Democratic, and we see the unions in Detroit have much stronger alliances to the Democratic Party, etc. So I think the question of unions and political parties, quite frequently those that are slightly left of center, often share sort of common goals, i.e. higher wages for people in particular places. So I think the question of deeming the strike political, etc., in a way, in a broad sense, strikes are by their very nature political. But I think it's important for us to kind of disaggregate that to the sort of bread and butter issues that were being kind of delineated in the strike. And so first I'll answer now your question about the nature of the negotiation. So it's clear to me, given, and I think this is the opportunity we have in this program, it's sort of very clear to me, given all of the readings and listening to the various actors who are a part of this, that there was some ongoing discussion, but it became clear that there was not the level of commitment to that discussion. I mean, I've seen things where Britain, the government, says, well, we've already delivered 73% of the requests, and so we were working, and then potentially. So I don't think that this is. It's clear as to the issues that Paul just delineated. It's clear that at the level of salaries, etc., and I think those are really crucial issues at this moment. That look, the average salary for a teacher in Guyana is perhaps in U.S. dollars maybe about $1,100, right? If you think about $1,100, maybe that translates to about $120,000. You think if you decide primary school teachers, Polish noted, so let's say it's about 60,000 Guyana dollars. That's clearly not going to be enough in this context. And so I think the ask on the part of the teachers, which I think, if I read correctly, was they wanted about 20% in 2019, 25% in 2020, 25% in 2021, 25% 2022, 25% 2023. And I think what they've gotten as far as 7% 2021, 8% 2022, and 6.5% proposed 2023. And also there are other things which have been done. I think there are some places where, salaries have been kind of corrected, and, broadly the government sort of assesses that it's spent close to about $700 million. So yes, I mean, I want to be clear. I can see that there was clearly some broad negotiation, but I think to Timothy's point, I think it was clear that, if I'm asking for 25 and you're giving me 6, there's a big gap between what's happening here. And if there's no real sense that, we're looking to have a serious discussion about where we find the middle ground, then I think that needed to be forced. And as, someone who has been in some of these kinds of discussions for their own salary, I see that as a completely reasonable thing. So I do think that, the sense of, look, we've addressed 73% of your requests, and, we've been doing, it's not completely an appropriate sort of response to the thing, right? So the quality of teaching depends on, the well-being, the motivation of teachers. And so meeting the sort of broad sort of set of salary and remuneration issues is really not just about kind of checking off the box, but it's the significance of what is met. And so I think, as my colleagues have said here, I think the teachers stood up in a way that I think we can all be proud of. And I hope that in this way, that the government also sees that it has a responsibility in that collective process to begin to have discussions in good faith that broadly look to find some consensual place where both parties land, that in a sense addresses some of these issues. So, investment in teachers is an investment in Guyana, and it directly impacts the quality of life of Guyanese. And I think that the government has a responsibility in that regard. And I think, we should be thankful that our teachers have actually kind of put this on the agenda and forced it. And I don't think that we should dismiss it or minimize it by thinking of it as political, because, all unions by definition are involved in some kind of political activity.
Look, workers all over the world usually ask far more than what is affordable by their employer. I mean, I remember when I was part of the union, we used to ask 10% a year for teachers, and we end up at 2.5% or 3%. So we got just a fraction of what we asked, and I'm sure it's the same thing at CUNY as well. So senior counsel, what do you make of the arguments made by Paul Tennassee and the other professor? We have lost senior counsel. Paul, you wanna?
Okay.
Sorry. Let me disagree with your attempt to draw an equivalency with the experience you just gave. The reality, and Paul pointed it out, is that teachers in Guyana have been migrating in droves since Burnham destroyed our economy in the 70s. So why are the teachers migrating? They're not migrating to do something else. They're going to teach in the Bahamas. They're going to teach in Barbados. Why does a teacher leave Guyana to go to teach as a foreigner, an alien, in a more hostile environment? The only reason is he's getting better treatment, better pay where he's going. That's the litmus test. As long as teachers are leaving here, and we've all had the experience, we've all gone to school in Ghana. The Trotzes, the Rollinses, the best teachers that I can think of that I remember. Stalwart, salt of the earth, members of the middle class, well educated, well qualified, leaving Guyana in droves and not coming back. It is a harm that cannot be repaired easily. And it continues. It has never stopped. It continued in the 2000s, the 2010s, and it continues now. Our teachers, as well as the nurses and police, are leaving. And the reason they're leaving is we are mistreating them. They do not get enough money. And worse yet, they are now seeing people becoming inordinately wealthy, receiving contracts, receiving perks, receiving preferential employment deals. And it's in their face, their noses are rubbed in it. So when, in light of a budget that is triple what it was just a few years ago, they see that and then they hear 6.5%. I don't think we can equate that to anything that's happening in countries where the relations are more nuanced and the interaction is more sophisticated, and the teachers are already able to pay their mortgage, take the family on a holiday, and they just want a slight increase, a slight improvement, but they're already making ends meet. The situation you're talking about, any Guyanese teacher would desperately go there and teach in that situation. Our teachers are not treated fairly. And here's the thing, you see, it's a vicious cycle. If you're not paying your teachers, you don't get good teachers. Your best teachers go. So we have teachers who are well-known, and the well-known good teachers give lessons. So they remain in the education system so that they can remain current, and so they can network. They know the students coming in, going out, and they therefore remain relevant and remain current, and attract students to the lessons where they earn their real money. The teachers who are not as well-known don't give lessons and are the ones you see that are doing two jobs. So I've heard of teachers, a teacher who is the call-in person in a taxi service, the dispatcher. I've heard of a teacher who's working in a snackette as a second job. If we are already losing quality because we're not attracting the best people because it doesn't pay, and then the people that we have can't focus on doing their jobs, can't focus on looking after the children, because as soon as 3 o'clock comes, they're running out to do another job just to make ends meet. Then the situation Paul describes, which is ideal, where a teacher knows her students, knows who has a problem at home, knows who needs special help, can devote her energy and her attention there conscientiously. That disappears. She hustling to go and dispatch in a taxi service. She's not dealing with homework and thinking, how can I deal with this problem, untangle this knot? So the quality of teaching is going down. And if you look at, let's go at CXC, the lowest level. Last year, 50% pass rate in Guyana. In maths, 35% pass rate, CXC in Guyana. 35%. Now, when you look at the government rag, the Chronicle, you will see Guyana tops the Caribbean. We get the worst results in the Caribbean, but where we do top the Caribbean is the 1 or 2 or 10 or 15 students who are at the very top, who get extraordinarily good results. And when you talk to them, I promise you not one of them will say, thank God I went to this government school where I got good teaching. Every last one of them is carefully nurtured by his or her parents, taken to lessons for each and every subject that they write. Lessons early in the morning, lessons late in the evening, lessons on weekends. That is what gets them passed, not our school system. So we have a vicious cycle. And the way to fix it is to pay our teachers so that our teachers are comfortable, so that they can drive their cars, they can buy their houses and pay their mortgages, they can go on holidays. They have the dignity that should inhere in the respectable and honorable profession of teaching. They do not have that.
So here's the question. Here's the question.
Dr. Bisram,
you will. But
you asked about the breakdown of the
yeah,
talk.
Paul,
I just want to give an insight. I have gotten the impression that these talks were within the context of the Ministry of Education Management with the union, correct? But it seems to me that the management in the Ministry of Education might not have the proper training about collective bargaining and negotiation because, ironically, Saddam Hussein, who happens to be the education officer, even tried to flout the order of the court. It seems to me that I have a sense, and the Minister of Labor, I consider him a friend, and he's very concerned about workers. I don't know why the Ministry of Labor did not give the kind of technical assistance in the negotiations within the Ministry of Education. The sense I'm getting is that the Ministry of Education is politicized, the management, and therefore they are not within the culture of labor management relations. And therefore, I think if I were to analyze what happened in this strike, and I do interviews and so, to make recommendations how this could be improved, then one of the things I will do is to review what has been the role of the Ministry of Labor in these negotiations within the context of the Ministry of Education. And I suspect that throughout the government ministries, that they don't have a culture of labor management, negotiations, and so forth. I don't think they might have had the training, or Mr. Saddam Hussein would not have done what he did.
So Professor Blackman, you made the point before, fiscal prudence. Government says we can't afford it. Yes, we are collecting oil money, but if we just use all of it now, there'll be nothing left for tomorrow. What do you make of that argument?
No, so I broadly agree on some fronts with what was said. But I think one of the points I wanted to make tonight, Mr. Timothy Jonas just made this point, about teacher compensation and its link to the overall education quality. And I think he really made it effectively, and I just want to amplify it, right? So because what he said is that the teacher salary is a key factor in attracting and retaining qualified talent. And so our salaries are low compared to regional and international salaries. And so we attract less qualified individuals. And what it's doing, it's a vicious spiral. But it's a spiral that's going in the wrong direction. And the point is, and I think he really hit it on the head, is that increased salaries will incentivize the further professional development and training that we need at this crucial moment when we're faced with this windfall oil in this moment. And I think the challenge that is facing the policymakers around the fiscal prudence has to do with thinking through long-term benefits, short-term costs. And so I think while the initial benefit, the initial investment, and I should say investment, that's also the other point that I wanted to emphasize in our conversation, that the teacher salary is an investment, just in the same way that we're investing in roads, in the same way that we're investing in hospitals, in the same way that we're investing in housing. The teacher investing, giving the teachers an increased salary is an investment in Guyana, and the long-term benefits of improved education. This is a point that Mr. Jonas was just making, of a better skilled workforce. This is the thing that will, in the long run, contribute to the economic growth and development, and it will outweigh the upfront costs that we're paying here over time. Now, obviously, I think you hit the, look, one of the points that in my reading of the government's position was that from their standpoint, and they noted that that teacher salaries account for about 30.3% of the total public sector wage bill. And it's increased, and it's significant. So I'm not going to say that it's not. It's increased from, the total bill increased from 72 billion in 2019 to 123 billion in 2024. So it's broadly a 71% increase in salaries. But that's salaries as a total of, that's salary in the aggregate. It doesn't say, you know, what the teacher that Professor Tennassee talked about, who is just starting out, who's a primary school teacher, so it's not, and I want to be clear, right? So it's not that, okay, there folks are not doing anything. And in relation to the oil money, they're financing about 30% of recurrent expenditure with National Resource Fund withdrawals. And so increasing this could really pose some undesirable fiscal sustainability risks. And, you know, look, the price of oil doesn't always go up, it can go down. And so when it goes down, you don't want to be left when the tide goes out and you're short. So I understand well that position. And I think what we have to do and what the government has to do, and I hope that is to think through some, you know, creative exploration, some other revenue streams, right? You know, what are things that are happening in the non-oil sector? You know, are we collecting our taxes more efficient? The point is, I think we have to start with the goal that we want to make the investment in teachers, start with the goal that we want to exercise some broad fiscal prudence, and then begin to see what's the ceiling, what's the headroom that we have that can support this investment in the near term, given the fact that the long-term benefits are, and so certainly within that context, you can have, you know, some kind of phased implementation approach, right? So instead of one, you can do it either two ways. You can make a big lump sum now and then phase it out later and say, look, you can't come back for 3 or 4 years, or you can do it the other way around, which is you can think in terms of, you know, committing to some gradual improvement, but saying it today so that everyone understands that maybe I'm not getting 25, 25, 25, but maybe it, like what happens here quite frequently is, you know, you're going to get 12 and then it's going to be 14 and then it's going to be 16, so that there is a sense of certainty about what the economic conditions are for teachers. But there are creative ways to do this. But I don't want to leave the impression that it's, you know, it's a no-brainer. It's not exactly a no-brainer. If you spend the money out, as you said, and you haven't done anything with it, and you haven't prepared the society in a real way to sustain itself beyond the time when you have these influxes, then you will have lost the game. So, you know, we don't want to see us lose the game, but we want to see us maybe play the game a bit better. And to address the issue I think Mr. Jonas raises, which is, you know, it's going to be very difficult if I'm at 60,000 and I see someone with 60 million right next to me. And maybe I'm educating that person's child in the school. You see, at some point there, it doesn't quite work. And I think the government and the teachers union have an opportunity to work in the interests of Guyana at this moment.
There is judicial intervention, and in fact, the judiciary brought the strike to an end. Did the judge act wisely, Paul, from a professorial point of view?
What's your question, Dr. Bisram?
The judicial intervention to end the strike. What's your assessment of it?
I think the judge did excellent. When I go next to Guyana, I'd like to meet him, to congratulate him. I know his father and all that, family of lawyers. He did very well. We need a separation of powers between the executive, the judiciary, and the legislative. And so he did well. But going back to what Dr. Blackman was saying, the investment in teachers, in economics, we call it the forward multiplier effect. the forward multiplier effect. You invest in teachers, the impact throughout the society is enormous. And you know, I don't want to go back to old politics, but I have a lot of memory about the politics in Guyana. Dr. Jagan went once to Wim Village at a public meeting, and the UF and the PNC was saying, highway to happiness, we're going to build roads. And Dr. Jagan asked, are we going to eat roads? Are we going to eat roads? So I am saying the president of Brazil said it's not Sophie's choice. You know, this lady had to decide. She had two children. German soldier told her, one goes to the death camp and one could stay with you. So how does a mother make that choice? So there's not choice between teachers and infrastructure. But I agree with Dr. Blackman what he's saying. We have to be careful also that with the windfall that we have, we don't over-invest in the public sector alone. But I don't think that is what is happening. I think there is a lot of investment in the infrastructure, and that's why the president of Brazil is very well informed, or he wouldn't have made that public statement that you have to balance between the investment in the infrastructure and that people have to eat and people have to educate them. I remember I passed GC a year before time because Miss Sankar, Shireen Sankar, used to give me lessons after, and I was going to Quarantine High, free of charge because she liked me. But that is what the attorney is speaking about. Go throughout Guyana, extra lessons is what make the difference. So the education system is virtually privatized in a way after hours. Those children should not be going after hours to do private lessons. They should be doing sports. They should be doing other kind of activities, cultural activities for their full development, their integral development, you know?
Actually, Paul Mix, can I offer just a question? Because for either you, Paul, or, you know, I was thinking today, how do the salaries of the teachers in the public sector compare to those in Guyana's private sector? So if the private schools, what are the salaries of the teachers of private schools relative to those who are part of in public schools?
I don't know the answer, but I believe the private schools' salaries is less, significantly less. In fact, in the US for sure, in New York for sure, I know the salary is substantially less for a private school than it was for the public school when I was teaching.
But in Guyana, I was interested in Guyana.
Yeah. Timothy, do you know? I don't know the answer. I'm sorry.
It's the other way around. In the private schools, the pay is of course better because the private schools want that luxury to be able to pick and choose their teachers.
Okay, so Timothy, since we have you, you want to give an assessment of the judicial intervention in the strike?
Well, okay. I think it was a very good decision by the judge. And I'm not talking law here. I'm talking as recognizing that the good judge acted as a man of experience and wisdom to pick two legal men who are above reproach and are of absolute integrity and reputation, Laku and Stobie, and put them to do the hard work. It was an excellent decision to make. I rather suspect that some arms were twisted behind the scenes because those two gentlemen who are very busy dropped everything to go and do this. And I suspect that some goodwill was used there. And they got a very prompt response. So that was well done. I'm not sure how far the end result has taken us. When I read this document that was signed, and you will see the PPP folk on social media touting the document and saying, well, this is what we're talking about all along. I don't see that very much was given up on one side. The first condition which was agreed was the teachers go back to work. Now, something tells me that after 4 weeks, their backs were against the wall, and it's very possible that they needed a dignified way out, a dignified exit, because certainly things were getting extreme. So maybe that is what happened. There was a dignified exit provided, you go back to work. But I didn't see anything else in the terms, for example, to guarantee them that their salaries would remain intact without deductions, or that there would be no other consequences, or any other guarantees. The only response I saw in the paperwork was that we will continue to have talks. Well, that's tepid. I'm sure you will agree that that doesn't say much. So I don't know that the litigation is at an end. I didn't see that the settlement spoke to the end of the litigation, and you will remember the purpose of the litigation was to challenge the decisions, first of all, to deduct salaries, and second of all, to stop the deduction and payment of dues directly to the union, which was one of the underhand things that the government did in this entire spectacle. So those aren't resolved either. So I rather suspect that what's happened is that the pot's off the fire. It's off the boil in that teachers are back in the classrooms and students are back in school. And I'm afraid that the end result of that will be that everything else peters out and dies a natural death, and that the teachers don't get the reward that they really deserve, having stood up for that long. But only time will tell. We will see.
Okay. You agree, Professor Blackman?
No, I actually see it quite differently. I actually think that this was so. First, to the question of the judge in this context, I think the judge is really to be commended for, in a sense, as Timothy Jonas noted, in a sense, it was not just a legal decision; it was a saving the society decision, saying, "Look, I need you, these various parts of our society, to sit down and do the appropriate thing." Paul Tennassee mentioned earlier. So as I recall, there's a chief labor officer under whose auspices something like this should be occurring. Except this didn't happen in this case, and I think the judge, recognizing that there seemed to lack a kind of institutional capacity to manage the labor relations aspects, decided that it was probably better to take this out of the hands of these folks, and so I don't think, and because it is in the context of the court, then you can't get decisions on salaries. So I think what you can get in this moment, which I think is the win, is that we now have a clear understanding, a legally binding understanding, that labor talks have to happen between the appropriate people who are responsible for having labor talks, between the government and the teachers' union. So I think that's one step. And the second part, which, and again, this reflects, and I certainly think, I certainly think the government, I can't speak in the sharp way that Mr. Jonas can speak, but I certainly think it was an error. And it reflected what I think the judge corrected, which is to say, okay, you're gone on strike, so we're going to do the sort of threatening thing. We're going to not pay you. And yes, I mean, there's this question. I mean, unions tend to have strike funds so as to mitigate it precisely against this. But it's in the context of Guyana, and there are certainly, I think, rules for, whether they be rules that are written, but rules that are part of traditionally how a government and a union might engage in this manner. So I think that this move to cut the salaries on day one, B, to remove the deduction, the check off. I mean, I have a check off in my pay stub. Every pay stub, there's a check off that goes to you. So that kind of thing, it seemed, that should not have been the action of the government in this context, right? A mature adult government does not act in that way. Okay, but having said that, I think the case, as far as I could see, the separation, there's some so there was some legal efforts made to stay this, and it seems that is kind of sitting in one part of the court, and the business of coming to the table is sitting in another part of the court. So I mean, you know, I'm not in Guyana, but just reading from a distance, I think, given all that I've read, given all that I've seen in this regard, it seems to me that the union can take a victory lap because they've essentially forced the issue. And now they will be able to sit down and have a discussion about their wage increases and, you know, whatever else is on the table, performance and incentives and traveling allowances and way you do the job and so on. So I think this is, you know, housing, maybe duty-free cars. There is a whole spectrum of things that can be discussed, but now it has to be discussed because there's a court order that forces that discussion. And, you know, God willing, there will come to some understanding that is good for Guyana and good for Guyanese altogether.
You know, in most countries, strikes are illegal for essential services, public services. Should it apply to Guyana as well? The teacher strike?
No, it's can I answer that? I mean, in CUNY, in New York, there's something called the Taylor law. And so I always remember the striking subway workers at some point, and you know, the subway person took the leader of the union took a tremendous amount of heat for doing it. But I think in this case, it is clear, and I think it's a wake-up call for the broader society to say we have to think about these things through the lens of equity. We're not saying we shouldn't say we want, you know, equality of outcomes, because, you know, there's no place in the world where you're going to have equality of outcomes. But I think what we have to be able to say, well, what is fair in our context? And certainly, I think we sitting at this table can agree that, you know, for a primary school teacher, you know, paying them $60,000 a year or $60,000 a month is not enough, right? That's $300-400 US dollars in this context, and you and I both know that there's no way, even with the cost of living difference between the United States and Guyana, but sometimes I think it's just as expensive. That's certainly not enough for someone to live on. I mean, you know, a single person earning $700 a month might just barely make it. So I think the government has an opportunity here to engage in a meaningful manner, and not in some of the sort of flip Facebook comments, but to engage in a meaningful way with the real lived life of Guyanese. And at the same time, I don't disagree with some of the position. It's just a question of how do you prioritize and how do you configure the pot so that you can achieve that sort of objective. And there are ways to do that.
Dr. Bisram, I just want 3 quick comments. Number one is, anybody who intervenes and stop Juice Checkoff is declaring war against the union. That's a lifeblood of the unions. I am the historian for the only independent black union in America. I've written 1 book on it. It was John F. Kennedy who allowed in the public sector, with a reform, Juice Checkoff. And until today in America, with the difficulties of unionizing in the private sector in America, that the public sector workers remain the stronghold of the labor movement in America. But I want to humanize this conversation a bit by saying this. There is a young teacher I spoke to today, and she said she was on strike for a week, and then she went back. I said, why did you go back? She said, Professor, me miss them picnic, me miss the children. You see what we are talking about? Me miss the children. Number 2, a teacher was interviewed. How could you go on strike? How the children will survive? How they're going to make out? And the teacher said, what about my children? Should they starve? So I think very often when we look at these issues, the human being is at the center of it. There's a human condition here. And leadership at all levels, in all societies, should have a more humane approach in spite of all the laws, the rules, the regulations, the industrial relations, complexities, and so forth. The human being. We must humanize these issues.
Okay, so let's turn to the senior counsel now to make an assessment of all of this.
Mr. Jonas, you're on mute.
I'm wondering where you want me to take it from there. You see, the examples that Dr. Blackman gave, I think immediately rebut any suggestion that we should be having some kind of calm conversation about, whether it's 5% or 10% or 15%. If you are paying a teacher less than $500 a month, we're not in the realm of 5% and 10% and 25% anymore. We are in extremis. We are at a desperate stage, and we got to start taking some serious steps. But I also want us, please, to consider short-term, medium-term, and long-term economic and social policies in the country. You see, sugar has collapsed, and the sugar employees are off. And these are agricultural people that are very limited in terms of the alternative employment you can offer them. You can't put them in an accounting shop. You can't put them in a lawyer's office. So you have an immediate short-term issue that is marginally being dealt with by the increases in construction and that kind of thing, but only peripherally. Many of these ex-Gaisuko folk have gone to subsistence farming, selling in the market and that kind of thing, which isn't good enough. But if our teachers are not producing, and our children are not learning, and remember, we got 50% illiteracy in Guyana because of our poor education standards. Over the next 10 years, 15 years, we will be producing another generation of the caliber of people who are equally employable only at certain levels. So this isn't a situation that needs to be remedied gradually. We need as a priority, more important than a road, more important than a bridge, more important than a skyscraper, more important than a contract awarded for a friend for 8 million or 800 million or 8 billion. We need to fix our teaching system so that the generation of Guyanese coming out in 10 or 15 years has the capacity, is equipped, first of all, to go to a tertiary level, second of all, to go to a managerial level or a supervisory level, and to deal with the burgeoning oil and gas economy and the demands that will be made from that. In Guyana, we got a shortage of accountants. Guyanese companies losing accountants because they are going to gas and oil. We got a shortage of managers, of administrators. We got a shortage of people at the white collar level. But they got too many blue collar folk. If we keep pushing out blue collar folk because we got 35% pass rate in math and we got 50% pass rate overall at CXC, we perpetuate the problem, and we got to fix that as a calamity now, not gradually. So we got to fix our teachers. We got to make it right for our teachers. We got them going to work properly in good conditions, earning good money, attracting better quality of people to teaching so that in 15 years, the graduates who come out are going there. You know, there's a big story about this Qatari hotel going up on Carifesta Avenue. And I hear the government saying, this is progress. We're going to provide employment. And I think to myself, I've seen hotels. If you're employed in a hotel, you're the barman, you're the maid sweeping the floor, you're the man cleaning the toilet, you're the man gardening or parking the car or cleaning the bedrooms. Is that the employment we want for the next generation of Guyanese who are coming out in 10 or 15 years? Or is that the employment that we want, as happens in Kuwait and Qatar, that foreigners come in and do that, and the people who are Guyanese and should have an expectation that to be Guyanese should be to be a first-class citizen in the world, that we stay in the hotel while other people look after us in the hotel. Now, it seems to me that our vision is so short-sighted that we've sent up our debt ceiling 3 times, borrowing money hand over fist. We've changed the rules so we could take money out of the oil and gas fund. So we are borrowing, We are going on a spending splurge with contracts. This bridge, this road, money being borrowed, money being spent, contracts for friends. And teachers get 6.5%. And in 15 years, 50% pass rate at CXE, 35% pass rate at maths, and Guyanese will be sweeping the floor because agriculture continues to go down. This is a disaster waiting to happen, and our teachers need to be fixed now.
So in the interest of time, if you could just give an overall assessment of the situation, and also for some recommendations as well, that those who were watching, maybe some government people and the union people, of what should be considered. And we must also take into consideration students should perform better, but teachers also need to up their skills as well. I mean, there has to be some kind of performance linked to salary increases as well as it is in the US. So Professor Blackman, I'll give you the first shot.
No, so I think it's been good to have this conversation. As we've been talking, I sort of have a better sense of some of these issues. I think the first issue is, as we've been describing, the wage increase. You've just identified one, sort of performance and incentives. We've been talking about the ways in which we can make the job better, traveling allowances, professional development allowances, professional development opportunities. So I think that the people there are professionals, they can list that out. They know what that is about. I think from my perspective, if I were to be someone who could say to someone in the negotiation, I said, look, what you want here is some open and some transparent communication between the leadership of the GTU and the people who are representing the government. What are the constraints that are there? What are the challenges that are associated with these increases? What are the things that we can actually do? And you bring some people in. You bring some of your economists in. You bring people in who can provide you with some creative solutions around what's as Paul has talked about. You bring people in who have some understanding of the technical know-how of labor relations and the kind of negotiation that you're involved in, and not just set this up for a kind of clash once more. This is an opportunity, as Timothy just expressed, for there to be a vision about what Guyana looks like in the future. And it can't be a vision where Guyanese are working at Qatari hotels. Not that I disagree with hotels in general, but I think that Guyanese don't want to be the people who are serving in the hotels. So it's that sense that the communication is open, transparent, that is respectful, and that ultimately they see it as a collaborative effort between the government and the union in the interests of Guyana. And I think that leads to the kind of innovative solution to the problem for financing the teacher salary increases that really have to happen, as Timothy Jonas noted, because in a sense there's no. You have to go for the big thing here to stabilize this part of the profession, so as to be able to build on this burgeoning oil and gas economy. If you don't, then if that's not part of your vision, then there's something else. But I think I'd hope that would be part of the. I don't think that the government is spending all of the money for the hospitals, for the roads, for all of these things, to just have the people who should be driving cars on them to be people from someplace else, and the people who are Guyanese to be those who are, the people who get to the emergency room only, right? So I think open, transparent communication between the GTU and the government, open with an understanding that these two stakeholders are working together in the interest of Guyana, and professional, technical people to facilitate that negotiation that will happen in the near future. So that would be my thought.
Professor Paul Tennassee?
Well, I just want to recall that President Ali at the CARICOM heads had a shout out. He said that over 50% of poverty exists in the English-speaking Caribbean, in the CARICOM countries, and that includes Guyana. So there is a challenge there. how do we deal with poverty, the poor, and the powerless? How do we empower them? How do we enthrone the working poor and the powerless in tables of governance with democratic decision making and budgets that they could take initiatives for their training and so forth to participate in development? So I think there have to be a rethinking away from the old way of looking at things. And in terms of labor management relations, I know the Minister of Labor well. I know that he's engaged in a lot of technical training. I was at Sleep In, staying, and I saw him using a space there, training people, and I've had conversation with him. I think he should go across all the ministries of the public sector and educate these management within these ministries about labor management relations. Because in this case study of the strike, of the breakdown, and having to resort to the judicial system is an indictment of the ability to manage labor management relations, industrial relations within the ministries. So I think that would be some of my reflections.
And Senior Counsel Timothy Jonas?
Actually, I just want to change tack here and talk about something that Paul had raised earlier. Saddam Hussein, the Chief Education Officer, he went through a bit of flack because people were saying that although there was an order of court, he sent a letter and all of that. No, I've never met the man, but by all accounts, I have asked, and by all accounts, he is a man of integrity and honesty. And I would like to remind all Guyanese that when someone works in a system and has a job, he takes legal advice, he writes a letter. We don't know if he had sight of any order of court, if anything was put in his hand or if he knew about it. But we do know that when you go to work every day, if there's a letter on your desk to be done and signed, you sign it and send it off. I understand the Attorney General indicated that he knew about the letter that went off. I want us to guard against rushing to judgment. I like to give everybody the benefit of the doubt if I can, and the opportunity to do the right thing, hoping that they will. And forgive me, I'm skeptical, expecting that they won't. But I would like to guard against judging that gentleman too harshly, because I have only heard good things about him. And being someone who is in the court system, I am aware of the many slips. You might not have knowledge of an order, you might not know the effect of the order. A bureaucratic step may be taken inadvertently. So let's not rush to judgment, and let us hope that everybody in their corner, in their cubicle, in their own bubble, does the best that they can, because that's the only way we can all move forward.
And I think he backtracked. I think he conceded that there was an error, and he was in agreement with the court's order. He clearly stated that he was not in defiance of the order. And any other point, gentlemen, before we leave?
No, the last, I suppose I would add a last point. I think the one that is the central, it's the argument that, these salary increases are unsustainable. We're not going to be able to do it. And there is some sense of, oil price is $100 or $80, and tomorrow it could be 40. And so in that sense, the volatility of the commodity markets, really, this is a legitimate argument. But I think the message that I want to suggest to folks is that, the salary increases, kind of looking through these lenses, could seem unsustainable in the short term. But it's really important to consider, as Mr. Jonas has eloquently sort of said, for long-term benefits of investing in education for Guyana. And I want to say it again, a well-compensated teaching is essential for attracting and retaining quality. And quality education is what Guyana needs in order to be able to take advantage of the moment. And if we don't have that, we're not going to take advantage, and we're going to look back on it with regret. And this is a moment for us to sort of understand that we have to bring the maturity that is necessary to sometimes do the hard job that leaders get asked to do. And I hope that leaders on all sides of the aisle can find that mindset that is necessary to move the country forward, understanding what has to happen now.
I think that's excellent advice. I mean, balancing affordability and retaining good teachers as well.
Oh, yeah.
I think we should leave it there. Timothy, good enough?
Well, yes, except I will reiterate that when you're paying someone $400 US, and the profligate spending we're seeing by government, we're not at that stage. We're not near that stage where we can't afford it. We can do much, much better.
All right, let's have that be the final word. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking your time out.
Thank you.
Joining us tonight for this discussion, assessing the teacher strike in Guyana that came to an end last Monday. Good night, all.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you,
Have a
sir.
wonderful evening. Take